I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender. A lot of people ask me, what podcast do I listen to? And the reality is I listen to very, very few. There's only a handful of like great podcasts out there. One of them, though, and one of my favorite podcasts ever is the Jordan Harbinger Show. I've got Jordan with me. Jordan, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
Jordan, I recently listened to your podcast, How to Ask for Advice. Brilliant podcast. I had a bunch of friends listen to it. Why don't you summarize that one for us?
Well, in this day and age of epidemics, I would say that asking for advice in a really terrible way is also kind of a, well, maybe less harmful epidemic, but long term, it does a lot of damage because I always get folks that are saying things like, "Hey, can we meet up? I want you to mentor me."
Right. It's like they're not asking you for help. They're kind of giving you a homework assignment for them.
Right. Like, oh, okay, so you want me to like sit down with you because you don't have any specific questions now and just outline some sort of curriculum for you to be successful in this project that you're doing or in this career that you're doing because you haven't even bothered to figure out what it is that you're getting stuck on. You don't even have enough education to get to the actual question. So it's just my job now to make sure you're successful. I'm not signing up for that. And I'm sure as heck not going to take a meeting in the middle of my workday to then sign up for that.
So I love how in this podcast you basically recommend ways for people to give advice, and it was unique and counterintuitive in some ways. I highly encourage people to listen to not only that episode, but you always have such a unique twist on all of your topics. All your guests are great. And again, I highly recommend the Jordan Harbinger Show.
Thanks, James.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
If I was going to put together a framework for how I should act during this lockdown, we don't know how long the lockdown's going to last. Like, I think the economy might reopen, but there still might be heavy social distancing, quarantining, mini lockdowns, personal lockdowns, self-isolating. So while I'm home for this extended period, what are like the 5 things I can do to really up my game, enhance my brain?
Let's do it. Absolutely. So the master question I want everyone to ask is just, as we begin with the end in mind, is we are going to come out of this eventually. Nobody knows how long it's going to be, right? But what's the story you want to tell about this time? And we are writing that story every single moment with every single decision and choice that we're making right now. So if you fast forward to 6 months from now, a year from now, how are we going to tell people what this time was like? And so the 5 things that I would focus on in terms of choice in no particular order is clarity. This is a wonderful time to reset and reevaluate. I think self-awareness is a superpower. I think that's part of the reason why we're here as the human experience is discovering more about ourselves. And this is a nice time in solitude for self-reflection.
But Jim, let me ask, like, let's say let's say I'm worried about my job, or let's say I'm worried about my family's health or whatever, and my brain's kind of been fixated, like mentioned earlier, it's been hijacked. Sometimes it might be difficult for me to kind of switch channels on the brain. Like, how do I do that? Third time on the podcast in the past 6 years. It's one of my first guests and now my latest guest, Jim Kwik, who is, I can't, Jim, first off, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. Thank you, everyone who's listening.
And Jim, I looked at all the praise you got for your book. So your book that is about to come out, we'll have you on again for the book, but the book that is about to come out is called Limitless. Jim, do you want to say what the subtitle is? I always forget subtitles.
It's all good. It's Limitless. Upgrade your brain, learn anything faster, and unlock your exceptional life.
And what we're going to talk about in this little episode is 5 brain-enhancing techniques while you're sitting at home during this quarantine/lockdown. But first, I want to ask you about some of the quotes I am seeing from these amazing people in, the quote section or the blurb section of your book. Like Alex Rodriguez, A-Rod, is calling you like, let me see if I can find the quote here. Jim Kwik is a personal trainer for your brain. He coached my team on accelerating learning strategies to da-da-da-da-da. And then you have Stan Lee, one of the founders of all my favorite superheroes. He's the creator of all my favorite superheroes. He gives you huge praise. Steve Aoki, the amazing DJ, when it comes to learning faster and keeping your mental game strong, Jim Kwik is the guy. You've got all these amazing quotes. How did you get all these?
How did that happen? Very, very, very honored to have worked with those individuals that you have mentioned. I'm a brain coach of sorts. I don't really know a label for what I do. It's my 28th year of teaching. You'd think I'd have this kind of dialed in. But as singers have a voice coach, or entrepreneurs have a financial or marketing coach, athletes have personal trainers. I want to be a trainer or a coach for your brain. And what that means is really becoming mentally fit and applying it towards learning faster, improving your memory, improving your focus, improving your critical thinking abilities, being able to read faster, and everything that would fall into this category of these mental superpowers in the spirit of Stanley.
It's so interesting because, and we're going to talk about it a lot more in our podcast about your book, Limitless. But and by the way, I love the title. One of my favorite movies in the past 10 years was Limitless with Bradley Cooper. I've probably watched it 5 times. I wish there could be a limitless pill, but your book is the pill, and you're going to describe these techniques. But what I'm curious about, we're both doing this remotely, this podcast, and everybody's been in lockdown for coronavirus. What do you do, just before we get into all the stuff about your book, what do you do just to keep the brain sharp? And you and I have similar philosophies. Like, I sort of feel the brain and creativity and mental performance is a muscle, and you have to exercise it, and you have to exercise it correctly. Like, if I just go down to the gym and lift weights, I'll probably end up in the hospital. But if I had a good trainer, if I had a good guide, I could get stronger. So the same tools that can make you stronger can also really hurt you if not used correctly. So I'm just curious, like, coronavirus lockdown, we're all, not only are we just told to stay home from work. That's not really the issue, because if that was it, then we'd all be happy and we'd be taking a vacation. But there's so much uncertainty in the world that there's a lot of fear, and it's not just, oh, this is the time to be productive. Everyone says on their podcast, this is the time to be productive, be creative, learn a skill. It's not so easy when you're stressed out of your mind, or there's going to be 30 million people unemployed. So these people are not thinking, oh, well, now I better enhance my brain. I guess I just got fired. Now's the perfect time for me. So what do you tell these people? Like, how can I let's say I want to improve and maximize my brain potential during this period in a way that I couldn't have otherwise. What would you tell me? How would you're my trainer right now.
Okay. So The metaphor that I would use right now, and you and I are both in New York City, so it's one of the more intense areas that we're experiencing. The metaphor I use is we're going through a metamorphosis. Doesn't it feel that way, that we're cocooning, right? We are cocooning. We're literally physically distancing ourselves from others. We are socially isolating ourselves. And in this cocoon, we're alone with our thoughts. We're alone with our fears. We're alone with our doubts. We feel lonely, and those feelings, whether they could be valid because of what's going on in the world, they could also place a limit and hold us back from the next cycle
Well,
of change.
Well, can I ask you about that? Because I
Absolutely.
think that actually is a really good metaphor, and I haven't really thought of it that way because, and I think you're right. I think that's the first thing, is to slightly think about it that way, as a cocoon. And the reason I don't think of it that way as much is because I feel kind of attached to the global anxiety that is
Yeah.
happening. Not necessarily that, I mean, I guess my anxiety level's up just like everyone's probably, but like you say, being in New York City, being in the news flow, I just feel it's hard to disconnect as much as I would like in order to do that rejuvenation.
Yeah, and I would love people to be able to get there and be able to be creative and be able to contribute and self care. But it's hard because we're hearing about physical hygiene, washing your hands and sanitizing everything, but we're not hearing a lot about mental hygiene and
Such
the
a
way
good
the
point.
brain. Yeah, the way the brain is set up, you know this, is just it's meant to protect ourselves. So we have to pay attention to what's threatening because that's our survival. And you know the mantra in media that if it bleeds, it leads. And one of the challenges is, and I see this in myself, and I see this people close to me, family and friends, that we could sometimes overindulge in the media. And I'm not just not to say that we shouldn't be paying attention. Absolutely. The metaphor that I use is, and I obviously use a lot of metaphors, whether it's a butterfly or it's, in this case, maybe a thermometer, a thermostat, where a thermometer, it the functionality, it reacts to the environment, and as human beings we do react to things. It's I don't even know how realistic it would be to not react to what's going on, not react to the what's going on in the economy, not react to the fear, to the climate, to everything. And I feel like the transition, or we could spend a little bit more time identifying less with a thermometer reacting to things and more as a thermostat, where a thermostat, it doesn't react to the environment, it gauges the environment so it knows what temperature it is. But then it always wants to, it could
Mm.
set a new temperature. And, in this case, for people who are listening, we can still set goals, we can still set vision and make the environment more what's inside our imagination. In the book Limitless, it's not about being perfect, it's about progressing and advancing, especially beyond what we currently believe is
Well,
possible.
so I like this metaphor of, and this distinction between a thermometer and a thermostat, because I think and I'm speaking for myself, but maybe other people could relate, is that everybody loathes uncertainty. We'd even rather have
Mhm.
bad news than uncertainty. And there's a lot of behavioral science studies that demonstrate that children will opt for a certain dollar, $1 now versus $2, an uncertain $2 later, even if the expected value is greater than a dollar. And in the stock market, you could see simply the fact that we don't know, what the blah, blah, blah growth rate, contagion rate,
Mhm.
all these things about this coronavirus. If we knew those things, and if we knew, for instance, oh, people are going to die, but it's going to be like a flu, it's not going to be millions, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. If we had more certainty even about bad news, I think the stock market would probably not have behaved the
Yeah.
way it has. And that's kind of a barometer of the world psychology. So how do I go about, I
Mhm.
can't just think, "Oh, I'm gonna set my thermostat." I have to set the thermostat. I have to
Right.
do something.
Yeah, I mean, I think this awareness first of having a framework or a paradigm of looking at something is a nice first step. Is being aware that there's a quote in the book. I quote a French philosopher that says, "Life is the C between the B and the D." Life is the C between the B and the
I
D.
love that.
And they're thinking Jim is speaking in tongues and code. B stands for birth, D stands for the other side,
Yes.
death, and C stands for choice. And it's a reminder that we have difficult times right now. They could diminish us, they could define us, or they could develop us. We ultimately are going to decide. And these decisions, I mean, our life in a way is the sum total of all the choices we've made up to this point. And even though, we didn't individually create, what's going on, I don't think a victim mentality where we're just reacting is as useful. It's not, for me, it's not about what's true. For me, it's these ideas in the book, which I know we'll talk about in another episode. I talk about lies. And a lie for me is a limited idea entertained, because obviously I have to iterate and acronyms everything to make it
What's an
memorable.
example of a limited idea?
A limited idea when it comes to what I focus on in learning is something like we only use 10% of our brain, right? And that's propagated through, movies such as the names of my book and other things where you're only using a small percentage, because science is saying that we actually use most of our brain like we use most of our body.
Right.
And so part of the book is about transcending. It's about ending the trance. It's about ending this mass hypnosis of things, these limiting beliefs or ideas that we picked up. And we weren't necessarily born with them. For people who know my story or listen to prior episodes with you know that I had learning challenges and a traumatic brain injury and these kind of things, that I was labeled broken by a teacher, literally, and that became my identity. But I wasn't born with that. It was, those the things that bind us often are imprinted on us by other people's expectations, by our experience, by our environment. And so a lie is not necessarily something that's, I'm not even thinking about as true or not true. It's something we give energy to, and we have certainty. And just like you say, the human brain needs certainty. People will stay in a relationship that's uncomfortable, but it's certain, and they won't change, or they'll stay at a certain level of health or finances or a job that they maybe don't love because the uncertainty of starting their own business and going out on their own is threatening.
You're so right. Like I think there's this constant this grasping for certainty, even when it might not be productive. So, for instance, everybody hanging on to the latest word of, how many deaths are there? What's going on
Mhm.
in Italy now? How are the hospital? We have enough ventilators in New York? Like, I think people are grasping onto any thing of certainty. And I think a key part of creativity and learning is being able to live in um, a period of uncertainty. And maybe that's the first step in setting the barometer is to kind of step back from trying to find certainty. What would be a good way to do that?
One of the ways is, first of all, knowing that choice and decision, coming back to that power. You mentioned Stan Lee, and I mentioned on a previous episode that Stan taught me an important lesson. And one time I was taking him out to dinner, and we're in the car, and I asked him who his favorite superhero was, and he said Iron Man. And I was fascinated by that, and he asked me, Jim, who's your favorite superhero? And I said Spider-Man, because he was wearing a Spider-Man tie, and that's the one I grew up with. And without a pause, in his trademark voice, he goes, "With great power comes great responsibility." And I tend to reverse things in my mind. I don't know if it's because of my traumatic brain injuries or something, but I heard something different, and I checked myself, and I was like, Stan, you're right. With great power comes great responsibility. And the opposite is also true. With great responsibility comes great power. When we take responsibility for our circumstances in life, it's like,
Mm.
whatever happened in the past, it's happened. There's nothing that we could do. But when we take responsibility for things right now, whether we are the cause or not, it gives us at least the autonomy and the agency to make things better. Because what's the opposite of that is just having no influence, no control over our lives. And so, I also think when we're talking about certainty, you could get it through small, simple steps. You don't have to make these big dramatic changes because that's hard, because the human brain, again, is wired for survival. It's not really wired for growth. You have to exert effort and, and intention and discipline to be able to make change, because, the nervous system wants it to have that certainty. And even people around you, you see this all around, that even if you are trying to learn and you listen to podcasts and you read books, some of the people around you are the ones that hold you back, because you give them the power to do so, because they like things staying the same also.
And
they don't want to see you change.
Jim, I think that's totally right. I think anytime you make a massive change in your life, there's always people who either discourage you or even go further. They say you can't do that, and I always think the more people who tell me I can't do something, that's kind of a signpost that I'm probably going in the right direction. Not
I
100% of a signpost, but
Yeah, I
usually a
like
good
that.
indication. And you make another point, which is that intention is very important, because again, if I want to change, I can't just um, think to my, a drug addict can't just think to himself, that's it, I'm stopping. They have to
Right.
actually go to meetings or have a partner or sponsor or whatever. They have to actually do things and move environments, stop hanging out with the same people, and so on. So and you mentioned BJ Fogg earlier. He's a great proponent of building. He even wrote a book called Tiny Habits, which
Hmm.
if you want to learn how to floss your teeth, just start flossing one tooth and then build up. So, okay, like if I want to
Yeah.
change now, if I want to kind of reduce my addiction to certainty in this horribly uncertain period,
Yeah.
what's the one of the choices I can make, or what are some of the
Yeah.
choices I can make right now?
Okay, so know that the brain is trying to preserve you, and it rather keep you certain rather than put you in a place that's unfamiliar, because that is perceived as a threat. It's not a saber-toothed tiger, but we act as if. It's just like the conversations you and I have had about stand up. I speak in front of 200,000 people live every single year, but this idea of getting in front of a group of people in a club and like do a set for like 5 or 10 minutes, and that gives me an uncertainty, and I can feel
It's
it. I'm just
terrifying.
being Yes. And then, so how did you get past that? Because I know we've been friends for quite some time, and that transition, like, how did you get over that lack of certainty?
Anytime anytime it's a good question, because when I was first, someone asked me, hey, do you want to do a stand-up set, I was terrified. And so again, that terror was a signpost for me, because obviously going on a stage and standing in front of 40 or 50 strangers and doing comedy is not going to, I'm not in the jungle being chased by
Right.
lions. Nothing's going to happen in those 5 minutes. I'm going to be physically safe. I'm going to be even reputation safe, because no one knows who I am. They're just a bunch of strangers or tourists or whatever. And anytime I felt that terror as regards stand up, only meant I should do it. So, for instance, if I was
Mm,
given a choice, hey, do you want to go up before Bill Burr, who's one of the best comedians in the world, or do you want to go up right after Bill Burr? Going up right after one of the most famous comedians in the world is terrifying, because the audience really doesn't care about you at that point. They're all so excited that they just saw Bill Burr. So I would always take the choice that was the scariest. I would go after him, because I knew that would also help me learn the fastest.
mm,
Or if they would say, "Hey, do you want to go up?" Um, there's all sorts of different parts of a lineup. Like, if do you want to go up when the waiter or waitress is giving the checks to everyone? That's called the check spot, and that's the most difficult spot, because everyone's figuring out the check. So I would always try to go on the check spot, even though that's usually the beginner spot, because the more people have been doing it longer don't want to go on it during that spot, and they've earned the right not to. But I would always choose to go on that spot. Anything that will help me learn faster, and anything that gave me terror, I would do. Plus, I loved it, so that kept me going through the terror.
yeah, and that's good. And when we have this other conversation about the limitless model, part of it is to do with human motivation and having reasons, and the feelings that come with that. But I would say that it's interesting, because you take these small, simple steps, and I actually have had, both BJ and James Clear and these experts on habits on my podcast, and we had these conversations, and I cite some of their work in here. But I would say that you do difficult things because it gives you, on the other side of it, the brain, again, wants to keep you safe. So going into unfamiliar areas, even though you're physically safe on that stage, it feels very different.
Yeah,
And so
it's
right
terrifying.
now, right. And the stage right now that we are globally, stepping outside, there's this fear. And just to understand how the brain has been hijacked for most of us, that it's trying to protect you. And so it has to pay attention to what's threatening. So we watch the news all the time because literally saw this ad 2 days ago. I was like,
I'm gonna write that
the
down.
things that you're not doing where you to help you not die or something like that. It was like at 7 o'clock. I'm like, yeah, everyone's going to tune into that because people aren't going to tune in to, hey, this many children were born and this many people got married and fell in love today. No one tunes into that because it's not threatening. But the thing is here the brain is primarily a deletion device because at any given time we could be paying attention to what? Hundreds of millions of stimuli, a billion stimuli, right, that we could be paying attention to. So primarily our brain's trying to keep information out. Otherwise we would go insane. It would be way overwhelmed, right? And so what do we allow in that filter? The handful of things that we could pay attention to consciously are the things that are important to us, that could threaten us, that could align with our values, that where our questions are, activating that part of our brain, the reticular activating system, and we know it's important. We let that through. The challenge is it's kind of like an algorithm on social media that if you are going through Instagram and you like or comment on every cat post, every cat video, that algorithm is going to start showing you more cats, and all of a sudden you're going to see more cats show up, and that's going to be your reality. The challenge is that people are always tuning into the news or watching everything about what's threatening. I'm not saying don't gauge what's going on. I'm just saying the overindulgence could really disturb your peace of mind, your productivity, your performance, your positivity, all of that.
I agree. That's all those things have been happening. By the way, I don't want you to feel like sometimes I'm typing. It's only because I'm taking notes on some of the things you're saying.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
I really love some of these things, so I've been just jotting them down
Yes.
in my.
So our brain is like an algorithm, just like a social media, Facebook algorithm. It starts feeding you the things you engage with. And if you start to watch the news and you hit this point where it just starts showing you darkness everywhere because it's just like showing you cats on social media. And the challenge is that's what you've chosen out of the billion stimuli to focus on, and it puts you in this chronic stress or anxiety, and that's not good for your brain. If we're talking about being brain healthy, chronic stress and anxiety shrinks your brain. We know
Right.
chronic fear, it actually suppresses your immune system. I mean, that's an area of science called psychoneuroimmunology, where if you're always afraid, then it compromises your immune system. So you're more susceptible to colds and flus, and viruses. And so so the goal here is not to be perfect. It's just to make progress and not to just lead a life where things are just happening and reacting to it. So if you're just watching what's dark, you're deleting everything else, right? And so that means you're not seeing the possibilities, you're not seeing the opportunities, you're not focusing on what you could be grateful for, in that moment. And I'm just saying, like, gauge what's going on, just like a thermostat does, but then also, be proactive about, and you could always decide what to focus on. You could always decide what things mean. Just like when you said, like when you feel terror, it makes you move forward because that terror means you're about to grow, or there's something that's going to be better on the other side of that. You're going to learn something, but you chose, going back to the power of choice, that life is a C between the B and the D. You're making a conscious choice about that. And I'm not saying it's easy. Nothing I'm saying is easy. But it's pretty simple, but it's very hard too. So it could be that simple, but also it could be that hard and that difficult. But I'm just saying the overindulgence of media makes you just see everything that potentially is dark. And then you were doing that at nighttime, and then people wonder why they can't sleep at night, because those are the things that they're putting into their brain. And so my challenge for everybody who's listening is just to remind them that that they have more control than they think, that we're not robots, that we do run on scripts. Some habits experts suggest 40% of our behaviors are purely unconscious habits. And whatever that number is, it is pretty substantial. Where we're not conscious, we're not putting mindfulness.
What's an example of an unconscious habit? Because on the one hand, I think of like physical things, we're
Hmm.
reminded, don't touch your face. The
Yeah.
average person touches their face every
Hmm.
minute. So that's one unconscious habit. But another unconscious habit could be, oh, whenever I'm about to read a book, I end up passing the television and turning on the TV instead.
Yeah.
So that's a
So
little bit more where I have a little bit more choice, I feel.
there are habits of behavior certainly, that we run scripts on, and we're triggered by all of the habit, and we have a whole chapter on designing and breaking habits, but everything starts with a reminder or a trigger, right? And so it can be an external trigger, something that you see and then you just do. It could be also, some people are hooked up for, like, they see a treadmill and they just feel that's their trigger and they just
That's
need
my
to get
trigger
on
to
that
run
thing.
as far as possible.
Or some people, like, think about, or it's an internal trigger. There's a feeling in their body. Maybe they get anxiety or fear, and then their trigger or habit of behavior is they grab food. Right. So
Oh.
many people opening up the refrigerator so much now because of the stress, because it helps them to get in a different place. And I'm just saying there that we have choice in this. There are also habits besides behavior. There are habits of thought. They say we have, what, 50, 70,000 thoughts a day. And, Deepak Chopra suggests that 90 or 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. And if we have the same habitual thoughts, we're going to have the same habitual focus. We also have habitual, not only behaviors and thoughts, we have habitual feelings. That we all have a go-to place when we're stressed. Some people feel, when they're triggered, they go anger. Some people feel guilt. Some people, feel a sense of challenge and playfulness. But these are things that are ingrained through neuroplasticity. So the good news and the bad news is these things are learned. But because they are learned, they could also be unlearned. And then we know through neuroplasticity, that having a thought or doing a new behavior can create new connections, much like, they say that neurons that fire together, they wire together, and we create, like, maybe somebody walking through a field, it doesn't leave much of a mark, but if they keep on walking through that same field, that same path, it becomes very, very clear and ingrained. And we are like that with what we eat sometimes, what we think, what we feel, what we do.
And this is relatively new research that you can kind of rewire your brain as an adult. So it used to be that scientists thought that extreme learning or fast learning or changing behaviors was easiest to do as a kid. Turns out this is not as true as people thought. That neuroplasticity happens your entire life. You can rewire the brain. You could learn
Mhm.
new behaviors. So tell me specifically, like, I want to
Yeah.
unlock myself
Yeah.
from this
Let's do this.
hijacking of my brain that looks at the news and the negativity that's out there. And I actually feel it too, just as a podcaster, and also I have let's say an audience on Twitter or whatever. I feel like I've kind of rationalized myself into thinking, oh, well, the more I really study all of this data and these models, I'll be able to kind of help people interpret them. And to some extent, that's true, but I feel like I've gotten a little obsessive. It's like my interest now is coronavirus, and I don't really like that. I don't think in the long run this is that helpful to me.
Exactly. And then I think that's part of unlimiting ourselves. Unlimiting is this process of removing limits, and just evaluating, being conscious of, is this serving me
So what can I
right
do?
now? Yes. So I would say, first of all, be conscious of it, right? And so it's hard, but it's difficult to turn off the news. It's difficult to turn off your phone an hour before you go to bed, because you are going against the grain for sure. And so again, it's not necessarily easy, but it is pretty simple, like what we need to be able to do. But it can be very difficult. But as it is for people getting on stage or doing stand up and practicing in a subway car or doing anything else like that, through that challenge, we get real change. And it's usually the difference that makes the difference. Even when you and I have talked about, like in previous episode, like my morning routine, a lot of the things I do the 10 things every morning to jumpstart my brain. So some of those things, half those things are a little bit difficult because I want to get in the habit of doing difficult things. So when I need to be able to call on that grit, it shows up. I need to have that difficult conversation with a client or a team member, or I need to get on stage where I'd normally be nervous. I've built that a little bit of resilience.
I love to recommend my favorite podcasts, and I have with me on the show one of my all-time favorite podcasters, Jordan Harbinger. Jordan, I love the Jordan Harbinger show, and thanks for coming on for a minute or two to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Man, I really like that episode you did with Tony Hawk recently, where he talks about the importance of taking risks. And of course, by the way, Tony Hawk is 11-time world champion skateboarder and has also probably made over 100 million on making, computer games about skateboarding and equipment and clothes and the whole thing. So what did he say about taking risks?
Well, he's brilliant because he takes risks, but also it's not some sort of super calculated, all right, skateboarding is going to become this thing again. It had its moment in the 80s, and then when that went away, he just kept doing it and kept getting better at it because he really enjoyed doing it. And so that in itself was a risk, but it was kind of a risk to do something he loved, so he didn't see it at the time as a risk. And he came on the show and discussed a lot of this, and his financial success, involves an element of luck, but also involves him just sticking with something that he really enjoyed, figuring he would win just by sticking with something he enjoyed, even if it didn't make him rich. And funnily enough, very apropos today's news, one of the things that made him really angry, and he talked about this story on the show, was that he had an agent one time, a product manager or something like that, and he walked into the guy's office and there was a roll of toilet paper with his face on it. And he said, "What the hell is that?" And the guy sort of awkwardly joked that Tony Hawk was so successful and so hot right now that they could put his face on toilet paper and it would sell. And he fired the person like right on the spot.
That is so funny. Well, and I also really love the fact that passion sometimes is more important than immediate money. Meaning you always have to pay for your responsibilities and so on and make money some way. But when skateboarding had a slowdown, I guess this was in the early 90s for the X Games, he just stuck with it. He worked in skateboard shops. He worked in, the clothing area of skateboarding and in the whole subculture. He was still involved. He never left it. And a lot of people left it during this downturn. And that's what propelled him to such success later on. So great episode, Jordan. And I highly recommend not only the episode, but your entire podcast. Thanks for joining me here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
So now that you're locked in, due to this quarantining and social distancing and everything, what are difficult things you've done during this crisis? Like, again, I'm guessing what you're saying is, kind of remind you, being aware, don't look at the news as much, disconnect your phone,
Yeah,
an
and
hour.
those are all obvious. And here's the thing: it's often those obvious things that are common sense that are not common practice. The reason I wrote this book initially was all methodology, things you and I have talked about in past episodes:
Right.
how to read 3 times faster, how to remember names and languages, facts, figures, everything. But then
But by the
asked
way,
myself,
that's one of the few our 2 podcasts together. I often have a hard time remembering, many details from podcasts I did years ago, but I still to this day do the speed reading techniques, not to skim. I read everything, but your techniques help in terms of learning and understanding, and the memory techniques. I mean, right from our earliest episode, we talked about the memory
years
palace,
ago.
and I still use aspects of that when I memorize things.
They're extremely. It's based on neuroscience, and it's also based on 28 years of just field testing this with children with learning challenges to seniors and so on. I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's, so keeping my brain healthy is just a paramount. And by the way, those incidences where I had my brain injury as a child, I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's at the same, around the same age. They imprint you and they put you on a path because these life conditions spark change, right? They move you in a direction, just like right now. I mean, a great question to ask ourselves. I was talking about the power of questions, about what to focus on. is, when you're having these habitual 50, 60,000 thoughts a day or whatever, are a lot of those thoughts are the questions we're asking ourselves. And there's certain questions we ask more than others. But if we're always asking these questions about what we fear, we're just kind of seeing that's the lens we focus on. And so going back to this, it's the struggle part. Like, what am I doing that could be difficult? Understanding that difficulty, and you're a great example of this, leads to growth. Meaning, adversity could lead to an advantage. A struggle could lead to strength. It's kind of like, let's extend this metaphor a little bit about a butterfly and a caterpillar. Let's say a boy is in the backyard and playing, comes across a caterpillar and runs inside, talks to the mom, and just, can I keep this? Can I please keep this as a pet, this caterpillar? Can I keep it? And the mom says, fine, as long as you feed it every day and you care for it, you take care of it. And she gives him a mason jar. And then he runs outside, puts the caterpillar in the mason jar, fills it with leaves so the caterpillar could eat, puts a couple tree branches in there, decorates it nice, and just watches this caterpillar in awe, as all caterpillars really do is just eat. And over time, one day, the caterpillar, who's gotten a little plump, starts to climb up the tree branch, the little branch that's in the jar, and starts spinning a cocoon around itself. And the boy's in utter amazement, total fascination, right? This bewilderment, never seen this before. And the cocoon, he's just waiting and waiting and waiting, and watches it for time and days. And then one day, though, to his surprise, there's a little opening coming from, within. And the caterpillar makes this little crack, and it's trying to get out, but it's having a hard time. If you've ever seen this on video, it's struggling. And the boy's a little impatient and also wants to help its pet. So he runs inside the house, grabs a pair of scissors, and clips the opening, that little hole open, and all of a sudden the butterfly flops out. But unexpected to the boy, what he was expecting, it doesn't look like a butterfly fully. Kind of does, but it's like mutated. It's as the body is very swollen and the wings are very shriveled. And he's just waiting for that butterfly to, transform in front of his eyes and fly like he's seen by other butterflies, and it doesn't. And he goes into the house and, starts crying and say, what's wrong with my butterfly, to his mom. And she asks what he did. And she explains that he cut open the hole. And she explains to him that it's through the struggle, going through that struggle of trying to get through the cocoon. Actually, it's the whole physiologically, when the caterpillar's coming out through that hole, it actually pushes the fluid from the body into the wings. So it nourishes the wings so they could grow and grow strong. And it's through the struggle that the butterfly gets its strength to be able to fly.
It's just that story, actually.
Yeah, this is not but some of us feel like, again, we're in this cocoon and we're struggling right now. But again, just like you going on stage or putting yourself in terror, situations where intellectually you're safe, physically safe, you do it because that's where you build your skills. That's where you grow the most. Because while the comfort zone is nice, not much grows there, right? And so it's the struggle. And so, even in life, when we just do the easy things in life, which is really right now sitting and binge watching Netflix or Hulu, Disney Plus, whatever people are binge watching, every single show ever made, and the easy thing to do is just to eat junk food and just sit on the couch and do that. It's not, we don't grow, we're not growing from that. Because if we just do the easy things, then life gets hard over time. But if we do the hard things, life gets a lot easier.
So like what are now, if I was going to put together a framework for how I should act during this lockdown, we don't know how long the lockdown's going to last. Like, I think the economy might reopen, but there still might be heavy social distancing, quarantining, mini lockdowns, personal lockdowns, self-isolating. So while I'm home for this extended period, what are like the 5 things I can do to really up my game, enhance my brain, really be more, achieve my potential?
Absolutely. So the master question I want everyone to ask is just as we begin with the end in mind, is we are going to come out of this eventually. Nobody knows how long it's going to be, right? But what's the story you want to tell about this time? And we are writing that story every single moment with every single decision and choice that we're making right now. So if you fast forward to 6 months from now, a year from now, how are we going to tell people what this time was like? And we could come out of this the choices we make now can make us, when we emerge from this, better or smarter or stronger in certain ways. And so the five things that I would focus on in terms of choice in no particular order is I would use, I'll make it five C's, right? Because I have to alliterate everything.
You have
So
the three M's
clarity,
in the book. You have the four
exactly. That's
D's.
done.
Now we've got five
Yes.
C's.
Here we go. Five C's you could do while you're cocooning. Number one, I would say clarity. This is a wonderful time to reset and reevaluate. I think self-awareness is a superpower. I think that's part of the reason why we're here as the human experience is discovering more about ourselves. And this is a nice time in solitude for self-reflection. And some people just don't like that solitude, but I feel like that it's so important that in order to get your mind right, we don't have a lot of maybe distractions if you turn off the television. And in the space of solitude, we could discover some kind of clarity. Simple prompt for that is just asking yourself, just checking in with yourself, as some people do on New Year's or their birthdays, like, what's most important to me in my life, or in my relationship right now, as without going to the past. Like, if I was to start zero-based thinking, what's most important to me in my career? What's most important to me as in my family?
But Jim, let me ask, like, let's say I'm worried about my job, or let's say
Yeah.
I'm worried about my family's health or whatever, and my brain's kind of been fixated, like you mentioned earlier, it's been hijacked.
Hmm.
Sometimes it might be difficult for me to kind of switch channels on the brain. Like, how do I do that?
Yeah. And I would start that you need a reason, first of all. You need a reason to do anything. Like, one of the keys to motivation, and we'll go through this obviously in the Limitless episode, is not motivation being hyped up in the moment and excited and jumping on chairs, and the next day nothing happens. But getting clear on the reason, because we know that reasons, they reap results. That if you don't, if you need to start with why, that part of the success formula is three H's: head, heart, hands. That you could want to make a change here, but it's hard, right, to make it out here with your hands. I'm pointing to my head. You have an idea in your head that you want to make a change, but you're not acting with your hands because you're in fright. And checking in with the second H, which is our heart, is allowing yourself to feel the pleasure or the pain that will come, the consequences of doing this thing or not doing this thing. Meaning that if what a wonderful time right now to clarify your life, but having a reason to do that. If you don't have a reason to clarify your life, we won't do it. If you don't have a reason to get on that stage, you're not going to do it. If you don't have a reason to work out, you're not going to do it on a regular basis. It's
So,
always going to be forced.
and I like this because it reminds me of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. This guy was in Auschwitz in a concentration camp, but managed to survive not only physically but emotionally, because he asked himself these same questions. What was the meaning of his life? And he had different meanings throughout, but it was asking that question. So to get clarity, it's kind of like, let's say I'm scared. I can say, hey, what? Just reevaluating, what's my goal in life, what's my meaning, what's my purpose. And I might not have an answer, but just having, setting aside some time, instead of watching TV for 3 hours, maybe just watch TV for 2.5 hours and spend a half hour writing possibilities down.
Yeah,
Where can I
and
go?
part of this is just drowning out. It's similar to eating, the negativity that we put in our mind, and I feel like we have to stand guard to that. Similar to how we stand guard to the people in our life that could be negative or draining on you. Similar that we stand guard to the food we eat. Like, we have choice about what we're putting into our mouth at all times, but sometimes it's habitual and it takes energy and effort and reasons to be able to change that behavior. But I know nothing will happen unless somebody has a reason to be able to do that. So I would say, I always would break it down in the smallest, simplest steps where you can't fail. It's like that negativity, like if you just ate good food and just eventually you wouldn't crave as much the junk food.
Right.
Right? Because you're just giving yourself what it needs. Same thing when you're around positive people that are encouraging and challenging you and supporting you. You have less tolerance for the people who aren't that. And same thing with the news. Like, one of the ways you balance it out is what you're reading, what you're listening to. Feed your mind instead of watching the news every single night and through your social media feed, listening to a podcast, where you get inspiration, you get some instruction, you get some hope, you get some help. But part of it is drowning out the negativity and doing small, simple things. The way you control your focus is by controlling the questions that we ask. And some people have, certain dominant questions like, why is this happening to me? And then all of a sudden your brain is a meaning searching, device. It's going to start seeing, oh, this is why it's happening to me. And this is why it's happening to me. And this is everything. And then that's all you see as opposed to what you could be focusing on. And it is a little Pollyanna? It's more like how your brain deletes. And so decide what you want to delete. And because we automatically we're distorting things, we're generalizing things, but why not do it in our favor where we're more resourceful? So the first C I would say is clarity. And again, in no particular order. So use this time for a little bit of self-reflection. You could journal and just revisit, where you are. Because when do we have this pause? Because often we go to the job, we're doing whatever we're doing, right? We're with the same people, we're eating the same food. We don't get that reset, this hard reset right now to reevaluate and just like, hey, is this really what I'm about? And it's a nice place and a little space to just find out what your values are or reconnect with what's most important to you in a relationship, in your career, and your fulfillment and everything else. And then are your actions aligned with those values? So that would be like clarity. Another C, and this is obvious again, the 5 are going to be obvious.
That's okay. Nothing's obvious in these times because there's so many bad habits we've been slipping into because of this strain on our bodies.
And I think a coach also just reminds you of what you already know, because common sense is not often common practice. And we need to hear certain things to balance out all the other stuff that, our brain has been hijacked about. So clarity. Another C is care. And that's obvious, right? But we've talked about this. It's not just your physical hygiene, sanitizing everything and wash your hands for 20 seconds and 6 feet, or, all this, but it's also mental hygiene and the things that you could do to care for yourself. Because again, if you're concerned, my thing is where you're going to put your power and your attention. Like, we can't control everything that's going on with the spread of this pandemic, so we can't control that from an external standpoint. We can control how we can't control even how the government, and their healthcare, but we can control as much as we can our own personal healthcare. We can't control the economy necessarily, but we can control our own personal finances and economy. And coming back to that, what can you do to just take care of your immune system, the self-care? What are you choosing to eat every single day as part of self-care? Part of self-care is also supplementing in vitamin C, which is good for your immune system. Part of self-care is prioritizing your sleep, because I know this is going to have a big, talk about mental health, all the anxiety, even the level of sleeplessness right now, but it's hard. It's hard to go to bed,
Sure.
At the same time and not just watch the news until 2:00 in the morning. But prioritizing it, because it's coming back to motivation, is just like not only the pleasure you'll get out of having a better life, meaning more productivity, performance, peace of mind, prosperity, that's obvious, right? If you want your business to grow, you need to be able to grow and take care of yourself. But it's also the allow yourself to feel the pain. Like, if you don't do this, what's the consequence then? I have a acquaintance that I know had a heart attack and still didn't change their diet or lifestyle, but when the daughter came to him and said, and cried to him, and he made the change in his lifestyle because he wanted to walk his daughter down the aisle.
So let me ask you, with care, what's a mental hygiene thing someone can do?
Yeah. So we talked in the book 10 things you could do for self-care, specifically for your brain, and it has everything to do with the brain foods and optimizing sleep. But one of them is stress management. We talked about how chronic stress, anxiety, fear shrinks your brain and how it compromises your immune system, makes you more susceptible to that. So I'd have some kind of practice. And people go to meditation, or they go to whatever helps them to get in that parasympathetic state, that rest, that digest, that recovery. Even taking 20 minutes off and just like having white space and going for a walk and being creative, whatever. I think a lot of people, when it comes to care, they're not burnt out, because they say this all the time, that they're burnt out because they're so busy, right? And everyone's addicted for this. It's a badge of honor for being busy, right? Because it means you're significant. And what I'm saying is that maybe you're not burnt out because you're doing too much. maybe you're burnt out because you're doing too little of the things that nourish you, that light you up,
That's a great
that
point.
help you to shine. And so care is not just about the food you eat and prioritizing sleep. Care is also falling in love with that person in the mirror that's been through so much but is still standing, and acknowledging that, and self-compassion, and knowing part of self-care also is knowing that when you say, or reminding yourself when you say yes to everybody or everything, that make sure you're not saying no to yourself, that having borders around your time and your energy or emotion is part of self-care and self-love also.
And so I sort of feel that a lot of these. Here's the question I was going to ask: is self-care being escapist at all? Like in the sense that when I watch TV for 3 hours and I'm taking a break from that news and I'm escaping into that, or let's say I play chess online for hours,
Yeah.
is that rejuvenating, or is that kind of just sinking me into my morass of thoughts and fears and so on? I'm just escaping them. I'm not actually
Yeah.
rejuvenating.
I think it's individual. As a coach, my goal is to help people to reach their goal in the most efficient, effective, enjoyable way. And so if I have no problem with people binge watching that or playing games and video games and doing that, if their intention behind it is entertainment, I see complete value out of that. It's just whatever your outcome is, it's just you can't complain about. My thing is excuses and people complaining about. You can't be upset by the results you didn't get by the work you didn't do. So my thing is
I like
that
that.
play video games or binge watch. If that's your thing and you want to rejuvenate and you want to distract yourself, use it with intention. But I'm saying, not everybody, if we're real here, not everybody has the same network connections. Not everybody has the same income. Not everybody has the same education. But we all have 24 hours in a day. So it's just how you choose to invest it. And who am I to say, don't play video games? If it gives you joy and it helps you to relax and it gives you a sense of, staves off some of the other stuff that's, I'd rather you do that than some other things, activities, because there's far worse things that you do. And know that if your goal is to have, this and build this brand and have this kind of income lifestyle, that there's an opportunity cost. And just own it. That's all I ask people to do, is just own your stuff, right? And so do it if you want to, but then also don't be upset if we're not getting results from work we're not doing. I'm talking about clarity on your life, what's important to you, caring for yourself. And I'm not saying spend 24/7 self-care, because that could be selfish, because there are other things. These are just one thing you can do. It's just reminding yourself, take care of yourself, because some people tend to, be there for everybody else, put themselves last, and these little choices add up. It's the consistency of all this, because little by little, a little adds up to a lot, because consistency compounds. So I'm just saying, you don't have to do all of this. Just one little thing puts you in a different direction consistently, right? And you can make it just like Dr. BJ Fogg from Stanford talks about, small little steps. Read. You don't have to read 45 minutes a day. Read one line a day. But I don't think a lot of people are going to stop there. I think a lot of people go within the next sentence. So you have clarity. You have caring. I would also say another C is contribution, because I feel like that's part of why we're here, is not just to receive, but also to contribute. And people might say, well, I don't have a lot to contribute. It doesn't have to be just your money. That could be part of your treasure, but it's also your talent. It's also your time. Like all these amazing people who are flying here to New York, and they're on the front lines of this, using their expertise to make things better. But it doesn't have to be anything vast. It could be just checking in on your neighbor that lives down the hallway, right? Or an elderly, but contribute. It's hard to feel fear and feel a sense of service and giving at the same time. Even when I had to get over my fear of speaking, because, I had the broken brain, I would get so upset if I had to give a book report. Like I would go sick in my stomach. And, I was so scared of getting the spotlight, because my superpower growing up as a kid was shrinking, was being invisible, because when you don't feel like you have a lot to offer. But for me to get over that now, and being in front of audiences, even having this conversation, knowing how people all around the world is watching it, as I think about service. I think about the one person who's listening to this that needs to hear something in this conversation. And that gets me over my fear. I can't feel fear and gratitude or giving at the same time. So how can you
That's such a great point. I actually even write about that in my book, Choose Yourself.
Hmm.
Is that when you get into that state where you're helping somebody, and I've been trying to do that during this period. Like we went to, there's odd volunteer jobs right now. For instance, you can go to a shelter or a food line, and it's not you don't have to necessarily help with serving the food. You know what they need help with? They need help keeping everybody 6 feet apart on the line
Yeah.
because homeless shelters are getting shut down for
Yeah.
not keeping 6 feet people 6 feet apart. So there's all these odd volunteer jobs. The other thing about giving and money is that you don't have to give a lot. So there's a lot of GoFundMe's for employees, for instance, who have been laid off by restaurants and bars, and maybe the restaurants and bars that you frequent a lot in your neighborhood. And I've been just going to those GoFundMe's, and if you give $10, it's not going to
Yeah.
break the bank, but you'll feel like you did something for these people who are part of your life. And
And you
I think that
have.
yeah, no, I'm a small business owner in the city. I own a bar slash comedy club, so I hear a lot about the employees in the different restaurants in town, and I always contribute to the GoFundmes no matter what.
I think again, little by little, little becomes a lot. And if
Yes,
any way you could give for you, particularly, it's individual for each person, but it helps us also to mitigate that fear. And when we're feeling a sense of certainty that we can make a difference. And I feel like everything in nature, it gives back to the environment. And so, my formula has always been learn, earn, return, right? The more you can learn, the more you can earn, the more you can return and be able to give. And so for
man,
us,
I
and
love these quotes, these acronyms, and these
a
what
lot
do you
of
call it?
Twitter quickisms. um,
There's a phrase for it when the back half of the word is the same sound on every word. I forgot what that is. Uh,
so these devices, whether they're acronyms or these little mnemonic things that rhyme or whatever, it's just these little things, these little brain bites that stick with people. But
yeah, I
but
love that.
I don't want to dilute the power behind it. Also, like I make it memorable for people so they could repost it, and they're like people will post it like, oh, I love this, and they'll tag both of us after this conversation. I challenge people to do that. But going back to contribution is contribute in your own way. There's no one's writing this, like you choose. Like for us on Facebook and Instagram, we are doing lives for kids. And because all the schools are shut down globally. And so I'm teaching them the one thing they didn't learn in school, which is learning how to learn. And I'm just going on every couple of weeks and just doing office hours. And I'm doing big group people tuning in on Instagram Live, Facebook Live. And I'm just teaching them how to focus, how to study, how to read faster, how to do those things. We're doing one, coming up for recession proofing your brain, absolutely free, with no agenda. It's just our unique way
Love that.
of contributing. I even created during this time a 10-day program, basics of speed reading, memory, reverse negative self-talk, to give to everybody who pre-orders the book, because it'll help them to read the book, and it'll just empower people. So how can you contribute in a meaningful way for you? So that's the third C. So we have clarity, we have care, we have contribution. And then the two that you already mentioned, I would say that, that sometimes that we hear something enough, then eventually it sticks. But this is also a time, that we could use as productive time. We could use this to create. And I don't know if this is true or not, but you see these memes online that during the plague, Shakespeare was, physically distancing himself. And I say physical distancing because it's just like you and I are being social right now. So it's not like you could be social through FaceTime and Zoom and phone calls and stuff like that, but we are physically distancing ourselves for the reasons that of what's going on in the world. But Shakespeare was physically distancing himself, and during that time, he had this surge, this personal renaissance where he was able to, what was it, King Lear, Macbeth, Anthony Cleopatra. He was very creative. And so, using this time, and who knows how long it's going to be, but how great would it be to go back and revisit that script you were writing, or that video, or that art, or however you personally express yourself again.
It's such a great point because again, I feel we've been kind of locked into this hourly news cycle. And again, for me, I've sort of rationalized it by saying, okay, I
Hmm.
have a background in, you know, data, science, statistics, computer science, and I also, because of this podcast, I've talked to leaders in almost every industry. So I
Hmm.
have a good skill set of interpreting data and kind of communicating it Again, I have that skill set from the writing and podcasting and so on, and communicating it in such a way that it's understandable. It's not hysterical like a lot of the news is, because I'm not trying to capture eyes. So I'm rationalizing it by saying I'm providing a contribution, but there's also, I don't think I've done enough of the self-care part while I've been thinking so much about this.
Exactly, and that could be your thing though. Like it's not even like judging, and you could as long as you know that you have intention, and so you don't have any kind of regret, and you're doing it with purpose. So I have no problem with people who are looking at everything, trying to get all the facts together, so they're using it more than just as a way just to indulge. You know what I mean? And cycle down,
Yeah.
like in places. And so if you're able to use that and be able to use it to help make decisions, you have a huge platform. And if you're utilizing that wisdom, the accumulated knowledge and distinctions, that's wonderful. And again, I'm not the judge. People can do whatever they want with their whatever is most important to them for clarity, whatever they're going to do for care, whatever they're creative, however they're going to uniquely contribute. I'm just saying we have these time. Most people say they don't have time. Well, most people now have a little bit more time. And so this could be the most productive period of your life. Maybe someone during this time comes up with something that really does put a dent in the universe.
I feel like saying that though, and I feel like a lot of people are saying, oh, you should be productive. It almost feels like a little bit of a homework assignment, even though I agree with it. So when I'm creative during this period, it makes me feel so much better than when I'm not being creative. But it's one of those things where, again, it's like you were saying earlier, you got to start off small. So there's a lot of things, and you mentioned James Clear's been on your podcast. He just sent around a great note, which even with 5 minutes of your time, if you just write for 5 straight minutes, you'll write a page. If you do push-ups for 5 straight minutes, that's a pretty good workout. So, it doesn't need to be a lot of time at first. Even when you stop listening to this, or even in the middle of listening to this, put this on pause for 5 minutes and just journal for those 5 minutes. Like, don't even pick the pen up, kind of Julia Cameron style, which she talks about in The Artist's Way with her journaling. But okay, so create is a good fourth one, and I think that's a really powerful one.
And then the fifth one I would offer, and I'm sure we could come up with more together, is capability. And this is the skill development. We've always said that, hey, when I have some time, I'm going to learn this language, or I'm going to learn how to code, or I'm going to learn how to be able to do whatever. And now we have unfettered access to all the information online through podcasts like yours, through books, and now
there's a lot of great online schools like Coursera or Teachable or whatever.
Exactly. And so now is a wonderful time to be able to level up your learning. And again, I feel what you're saying, that we're hearing everyone saying, let's be productive, and then part of the reason you do that also is so you're not doing something else, right? So you're not doing the stuff that we know is serving our greater good or anybody else. And so capabilities is, you have your to-do list, but maybe you start a to learn list and you revisit that, and what's what. And you know what the key to these 5 things are is just when you mention, like, it's time. Right? Because time and attention is what life is made out of. And so what I would say is start small, right? I call it S3, small, simple steps, and schedule it. And if you just do that, start small with your self-care and just schedule when you're going to do that 5 minutes of, calisthenics or rebounding, you know what I mean? Or a little bit of CrossFit, whatever. Start small and then just schedule it. Schedule, your creative time. Hey, I'm going to read just for these 5 minutes a day. That's it. Small, simple step. And then you do it. And the habit that you're building is the habit of showing up for yourself, consistently over and over again. Schedule time for being creative. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. But just like you said, hey, I'm going to write for just 5 minutes. And it's so we don't have to make it daunting. And I know when we talk about the Limitless model, that's a big part, because it's about one of the myths and the lies in the mindset area, besides 10% of your brain and intelligence is fixed, these kind of lies, is that knowledge is power. And we've talked about this, that knowledge, that all the podcasts and books and courses, none of it works unless we work. And so I would say is, make it a small, simple step, and then schedule these things. And little by little, again,
scheduling is very important too.
Yes, because we schedule doctor's appointments, or we schedule PTA meetings, or we schedule meetings with investors or our clients, but we don't always schedule the things for our own personal care, self-development, and growth.
You know, I a few years ago, I wasn't living in New York City for a little while. I was living about 60 miles north, and one of the best things I ever did. So I'm a heavy reader, and I'm not a heavy online learner. Like I don't do a lot of online courses, but I did this one course on Coursera. This was like I think 2015 or 2016, and it was a course called Sapiens. It was the history of the human species, and it was obviously Yuval Harari, who ended up writing the book Sapiens based on the course. He was the instructor, and I learned so much. It changed my life just taking that one course and seeing the history of the human species from a different perspective. And again, this was long before he came out with the book Sapiens, and then he was on my podcast a couple of times. But
Mm,
it really changed my thinking about a lot of different things. And you know, if you go to Coursera now or any of these online schools and just see what courses they offer, it doesn't take a lot to take one course. You don't have to do all the homework. You don't have to do all the assignments. You can just listen to the half hour or hour, classes each week, and it's just even something like that's really valuable. But it was easier for me to schedule it living outside of New York than living in New
yeah,
York. New York, I feel
yeah.
you're kind of immersed in the just flow of life here, and now it's the flow of anxiety. But all of these things are important. So I'm gonna just quickly summarize this. So there's clarity, which is kind of just asking yourself or reminding yourself, hey, this is a step back. Yes, I have all these things I'm worried about, but if just being curious about what are my possibilities as we get into this new normal when this
Hmm.
lockdown ends and this quarantining ends. There's care, which involves physical self care, mental health care, and they're related, and emotional health care as well. They're all related. So everything from hygiene to maybe some quiet time or journaling or whatever. And then there's contribution, which I think is very important. And there's probably a million ways to contribute, but we talked about a couple. One is directly contributing to, or another is contributing your time, or another is checking in with a loved one or somebody who might be lonely or an elderly person. And there's also, by the way, online you can find volunteer opportunities where you check in via Zoom on people who are elderly and just need to touch base with somebody. Or there's also there's lots if you search for coronavirus volunteer opportunities, there are a lot of things that come up. Then you talked about being creative. So either again journal, or maybe take out a crayon and just draw a little bit. Or I don't know, what are some other ways someone could be creative? Go to Teespring and make a T-shirt and sell it, or do something. What are some other creative things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the future belongs a lot to the creators and creatives, because
Absolutely.
where jobs are going to machines and automation and artificial intelligence. I think what makes us innately human and valuable in society is, I talk about limitless. What's unlimited, the unlimited resource we have on planet Earth is the human mind, is human potential. There's no limit to creativity. There's no limit to imagination. There's
I
no
think people
limit.
think there is a limit, though.
Yeah, and I think that would be a lie. And so, and here's the thing: it's not about what's true or what's not true. It's what serves you. Like these decisions that we make, these things, ideas, whether they're a lie that were an idea that we're entertaining or something else. I feel like that, it helps to have a global idea on something that gives me more possibilities and potential. Because I think most people fall short of hitting things that they don't want to achieve.
But it's interesting because there's a like I'm not going to be, and maybe this is a self-limiting belief, but I'm not going to be as good a painter as say Vincent van Gogh. So there might be ways in which skill is limited, but in terms of being creative, I can sit down and try to paint like Vincent van Gogh anyway. Nothing can stop me from doing that. It's not like I'm going to make $40 million doing it, but I'm allowed to do whatever I want.
Yeah, and I think that belief that's more empowering than what the opposite. Because what's the opposite? That we have no potential to be able to do it. And when it comes to creativity, there are infinite possibilities, right? In terms of how you express yourself. And the people that even innovate, they're asking those different questions about, we could go into this in another conversation, but creativity is just how you want to be able to express yourself, and knowing that there's always a third and a fourth, and many different ways.
Yeah, I think right. You're right. Creativity is a subject entirely on its own, but it's interesting because there's a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a nice way of or a scientific way of saying, um, a little knowledge could be a harmful thing. I forget what the actual expression is, but what this bias is if you start to do something and you get excited about it, you usually think you're better than you are. So, for instance, young drivers often think 9 out of 10 drivers think they're above average, which is impossible. Only 4 out of 10 are,
Right.
and but it's important to. I think there's a useful side to Dunning-Kruger bias, which is the first time you sit down to write a novel, you're probably not going to write the best novel on the planet. But if you think you're good, if you're excited about your growth, that'll keep you going through that period of rejection and frustration and self-doubt and so on. So when I started doing stand-up, I would say it took probably a couple of years before I could really handle myself in a professional room. But I had Dunning-Kruger bias, so I thought I was brilliant right in the beginning, and that kept me going through those first, let's say, 3 years even, where I wasn't really at the potential I wanted, but I didn't quite know that. I only knew that on certain days, not on every day, and it kept me going.
Yeah, and I hear exactly what you're saying. For me, again, it's not right or wrong. It's what's serving you, and your intention, and your outcome. And so what is empowering you in that moment, and what's not. And so for me, I choose to believe that everybody could express themselves and be creative, and that there's always a way. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But I choose to believe it because I'll act accordingly, and hopefully I'll err more on getting more results than if I had the opposite belief.
Well, and it also helps, like in the field of creativity, in any field you're pursuing. So there's one hand where it's just putting your mind to creative use,
Hmm.
and there's lots of ways to do that. But in a specific field, if you're creative, you're also trying to find your own unique voice. How can I don't want to draw like Vincent van Gogh. I want to draw like how I would draw if I had great skills as an artist.
Hmm.
But now anybody can pick up a crayon and draw, so that's creative no matter what. But then your fifth C was capability and learning a skill. And here's a great time to kind of combine. You're ultimately going to have confidence not by telling yourself to be confident, but by getting good at something. And then you're confident that, hey, I'm better at this
Yes.
than most other people. And it's not that hard to be better than most people. It's just people don't realize this. It just takes a little bit of work to be in the top 1% of almost any field. Now, it doesn't mean you're in the top 100 people in the world, but the top 1%, like let's say you played, golf, probably, and I don't play golf at all, so I might not know what I'm talking about, but it probably to be in the top 1%, I only need a handicap of 10 or 20 to be in the top 1% of all humans in the world at golf. And so it doesn't take a lot to experience that exponential learning curve and feel good about skills that you're learning and where you are in rank and so on.
I agree. And in psychology, they have this confidence loop, that the more competent you get at something, the more confident you have confidence. And because you're confident, you're going to do that thing more, which should make you even more competent, which
Totally
fuels
true.
your confidence. Sure. And I, whether it's stand up or it's golf or anything, you'll notice with these 5 C's, I always, as a coach, like I don't treat everybody the same. I'm saying self-care the way you self-care, get clarity on your own life, your own values, contribute in your own unique way, use your talents to be able to do something in your situation, create however you create, not how anybody else does, and capabilities learn is something. So I keep it open-ended, it's structured. All I ask is, hey, if you're having trouble getting some traction with this, break it down into something small and not intimidating that requires a little effort and energy where you can't fail and you could show up, or at least, get over this fear of, I'll do the stand up. I'll say that publicly right now with you. I always tell people to try something at least 3 times. Try it once, to try to, mitigate the fear of it. Try it again to just, kind of get the groove and maybe learn it a little bit. Try it again the third time to see if you like it or not. Because maybe, part of finding your passion is creating it and just giving yourself stimulus and novelty and see where your heart goes. And because you don't want, you could, I think people could do a lot of things, but they can't do everything. And so even whether
But
it's
it's a great point, though. People can do a lot of things. You don't have to pick a lane and only stick to that
oh
lane.
yeah, oh
And
yeah,
it's funny because 3.5 weeks ago, I was in the Netherlands and I was actually performing and touring all over the Netherlands, hit 5 different cities in 7
wow,
days, and did stand up. Maybe the last international touring comedian in history, depending on these travel bans. Because the day after I came back, all the lockdowns and travel bans
mm,
started, and so I actually haven't done any stand up now in almost a month. And the last one I did was in Rotterdam, and it was very exciting, huge crowd, everything. And it's been a weird shift, but I've been dusting off. A lot of people have been asking me during this period, oh, what investment opportunities are out there? Because I have a background in that as well. And I've written a bunch of books on that. So I've been dusting off that skill set while relaxing a little bit the stand-up skill set, even though I'm missing it now.
yeah. And with technology today, do you see when we're saying you could contribute or create or anything is like we're having this conversation using technology. Stand-up clubs don't have to be limited to 4 walls. Neither do classrooms, and so we could you could you. I would love. I would tune into an Instagram live or you doing stand-up. That'd be amazing. And so
Yeah, maybe I'll try that. I don't know. That sounds terrifying. So we'll see. I've
but
got,
my
you know what the thing is now though is I have to, every comedian has to write new material, I feel, because the only topic at the moment is coronavirus.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
but we'll
and it's an interesting time, and so again, difficult times. I mentioned this, but difficult times as a reminder, they could define us. Difficult times they could diminish us, or difficult times could develop us. And it comes back to we decide. We have this choice. That again, while the beauty is in the butterfly, the growth is happening in the cocoon, and sometimes you have to fight through some bad days to earn your better days, right? Like when the caterpillar thinks like the world is over, then it emerges and it becomes a butterfly. And when we're talking about a butterfly, we could also have this butterfly effect, just like how everything has spread with the pandemic in a negative way. So has fear, right? There's this whole mind virus, which is extremely damaging also as well. But that butterfly, spreading its wings and flapping its wings here in New York could create a tsunami of change across the globe, metaphorically, because it's complex systems. And we could flap our wings with, as much as a virus changes things, as fear spreads, so does kindness. I really do believe. So does kindness, so does caring, so does compassion, so does love. And all that stuff is free. So we should be sprinkling that stuff everywhere because we never know the ripple effect and who needs to hear it. Like even like, did you hear like how people were cheering last night at 7 o'clock
yeah.
for all the healthcare workers and people on the front lines? I mean, like that stuff. It's it spreads, and so I'm saying is that things are the way they are, and we can't change the past. What we can always control though is what we focus on, what things mean. We can control our self-talk. We can control what we put in our body, whether it's the food or what we're feeding it, whether it's podcasts. We could control, who we're socializing with right now, and we control our contribution. It's just, you don't have to do everything, but do something,
You
so
know what you just said, you use the word, kindness, and you also said fear can be contagious. And it's very interesting because I guess, like, when you think about this virus, let's say you have the virus, you're invisibly shedding cells of the virus all the time, and that's how you're contagious. That's how people around you get it. But I guess as humans, we're constantly shedding whatever it is that's in our minds or on our bodies. Like, so you see this on Twitter or in the media very acutely, where if somebody's afraid and they start posting all these tweets like 6 million unemployed, we're up to 1 million infections, that's contagious. People then get afraid. Your fear becomes contagious. Whereas kindness also, there's a lot of evidence, like take these GoFundMe's for charity. There's evidence that if you share, I don't like to share on my page when I donate because it feels like, oh, bragging, whatever. But there's all these studies, and they GoFundMe sends you a message after you donate. People are 3 times more likely to make a contribution if they see one of their friends has contributed. So that's why people are encouraged to actually share. So because it is, like you say, kindness is contagious. It's almost a sixth C. Make sure whatever you do, you're not afraid that it's going to be contagious.
I'm saying what we do matters, and people are watching, and who's counting on us to come out of this, better, so we could be able to better serve them, whether it's our customers, whether it's our families, whether it's our friends, because if you're struggling right now, my heart goes out to you. I wish you nothing but strength and security and health, whatever it is you need the most. And know that people are watching, and that you inspire people with your grit, you inspire people with your grace. And yeah, it's not, life is certainly not easy. We go through these challenging times, but I would say that, and you've heard me say this before, but I'll use the cocoon as an example, that life is like a cocoon, that if a cocoon is broken by an outside force, then life ends. But if it's broken by an inside force, life begins.
This could be a political philosophy though, too, because look at, we've taken so much direction from the government during this past month, and now we're getting the stimulus package, which I was in favor of, but it could be argued that, hey, if we depend too much on stimulus to get our second lives going, our new normal going once this ends, then that's not going to be so good personally, even though it might be a buffer, it might be a Band-Aid societally, it's not the cure.
And maybe what it is that it stimulates, because people are in need, and it allows them, gives them some breathing room to build something, and to create something and position themselves in a way. But and so my message here this whole time is that we take responsibility. That responsibility will give you more options. It'll give you more power to make things better. And because as that life comes out of that cocoon, or life comes out of that egg, is that we have greatness. I really do believe we have, amazing things inside of us. And that's why I'm so passionate about these kind of conversations, and I want to thank you for bringing these messages of practical things, because people need hope. They need help right now. And it's in my opinion, it's a better alternative to feed your brain with these kind of conversations, with these
Absolutely.
kind of books and podcasts, and just having some kind of balance, and balance is a loaded word, but choose.
So let me ask you. So by the way, just to summarize the 5 C's, which I really believe in, clarity, which I would describe as set aside time so you can ask yourself what your possibilities are, as opposed to just being afraid all day or watching news all day or whatever it is you're doing that's making you unhappy. So clarity, care, contribution, create, and capability, which is feel the pleasure of getting on a learning curve, which always feels good. It kind of triggers that dopamine when you learn a new skill, and that skill could be anything. Like my daughter, she's been watching breakdancing videos and while during this period and learning how to breakdance. So or there's plenty of things out there. It's just you have to, like you said, schedule the time to do it. Let me ask you this, Jim. During this period, has there been a moment where you just like something was frustrating to you, or you were disappointed in something, or you got scared, where you just kind of broke down a little bit?
I mean, certainly, again, like I'm not perfect, nor do I profess to be. I lean into the stuff I teach because it's what works for me and clients, that some of them you've read in the beginning of this episode. Challenging times, like my fear goes to just family, their health and their well-being, and so I have aging parents I care for dearly, and are very susceptible. So my fears go there. And so I'm human like anybody else. I've been launching this book. I waited 28 years to come out with this book. So it's an interesting time for the book to be released, because I had 20 speaking engagements in front of, almost 50,000 people cumulative. And that was a big way that I was going to share this book. And that totally got hijacked. Every single one of them was canceled. So that was just not, I didn't cheer when that happened, but I centered myself and I thought, okay, I can't control this. What do I have control over? And so then I focus on that because it's just not productive because I get no points for just, ruminating on all the things that could have been, one way because I can't change it. And so I just feel like it's a waste of energy. It's a waste of time, shame on me. And also I want to be an example for people around me. So I just, I pick myself up and I just say, okay, if I have to start over completely, that a lot of planning and team and energy and effort went into putting those together. What can I do now? And ask myself creative questions like, hey, how can I reach as many people, doing something virtually? And that's when I do like these live streams and focus on podcasts and be more creative. And, even though I'm limited, quote unquote, and getting on a plane and going places and, doing some traditional media because they're all reporting on this. So that wasn't, the best news ever, but but again, this is life. And we just try to, we make the, I mean, we could wish it's something different, but I'd rather people see it the way it is and then do what they can to make it the way they want it to be. And so part of that limitless process, I also had the option of moving this book launch to the fall. But I told everyone that no, we're going to launch it now because this is more than a book on speed reading, learning languages, and remembering people's names. This is about mastering your mind. This is about regaining your focus and productivity when you're home. This is about helping your kids and being productive and focused, and doing the things you need to be able to do and overcoming these perceived limits. And so I feel like when people get this book or they gift this book, they're giving people permission to get their power back. It's an extension of this conversation. And so I'm on a mission. This, this since we first met. Like I grew up as the boy with the broken brain. So my mission is to build better, brighter brains, to leave no brain left behind, no brain left behind. And so I'll do it in any way, whether it's a podcast or a book or, a video or, anything. I just want people's brain because this controls everything. Because you upgrade, people upgrade their phones and their apps more than they upgrade their brain. If you get your brain,
That's so true.
if you get your brain right, your mind will follow. Your mindset will follow, your attitude will follow. And that's my passion. And my passion is learning. I feel like your passion is what lights you up. It could be stand up. It's not limited to one thing, right? I don't think we're predestined for one passion. I think you give yourself enough stimulus and novelty and see where your heart goes, your mind goes when it wanders. And then, that's what lights you up. And your purpose is what lights other people up. So my passion is learning and my purpose is teaching people how to learn. I think
And Jim, I want to emphasize that we're going to be talking about your book. So your book's coming out right now. The launch date is supposed to be April 28th. We'll see what Amazon does, what your publisher does, and so on. But we're going to be talking about the book, and it's such a fascinating book. We're going to be talking about it in the next podcast that we do, which will come out in a couple weeks, closer to your book's time. This podcast focuses on the 5 ways you can enhance your brain during this lockdown or quarantine. But this is completely, and everybody should go out and pre-order Limitless by Jim Kwik, Kwik.
James, can I tell people how to do it real fast?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if people enjoy this conversation and they really want to be able to be creative and have clarity and level up their capabilities, when you go to limitlessbook.com, even though the book's it is available this month, so it'll be coming shortly. I created this 10-day program to becoming limitless. And so for those of you who want a small, simple step, for the whatever $18 on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever the book is, I gift you a 10-day program to coach you through this process of mindset and overcoming procrastination and doing the things so that when you get the book, you're going to read the book. And then I created a 4-week book club based on the 4 sections of the book. So after you receive it, we're going to do video and do a week on every single chapter, on every single section. So I show you how to remember it and apply it. And that's my dharma, which is in my mission. So limitlessbook.com. And I would challenge everyone actually to screenshot this episode, because one of the fastest ways to actually, again, put your attention on somebody else is to share and teach. And so I would challenge everybody to screenshot this episode, tag James, tag myself on social media. I'm at Jim Kwik, and share just one thing you got out of this. What out of those 5 C's, what are you going to put some attention to that maybe you haven't shined a light there yet? or one aha moment you got here. And that way you're sharing it with somebody else, and maybe they see it and they feel inspired to listen to this episode or take your advice. And I'll actually send a galley. I have a handful of galleys left. I'll actually I'll repost a couple of my favorites, and I'll send a signed galley to one person, just as a thank you for listening to this episode.
So, and Jim, thanks so much for coming on today and helping us all kind of deal with this sort of an event that never happened before in history, really, where the entire globe just sort of is essentially shut in at the moment. And on the positive side, we're all moving towards this goal of eliminating this virus, but it's a very difficult time, and you really provided a lot of great advice about how not to be addicted to the misery of it or the anxiety of it, and how you can actually instead move forward as a result of this time. And just as a sneak peek into our Limitless podcast, where we talk about your book, first go to limitlessbook.com, where not only can you access the ordering of the book, but you can also access your 10-day program and 4-week book club. But a little sneak peek, we're going to talk about mindset, methods, and motivation when we talk about your book, Limitless. And I'm so excited for that. So once again, Jim, thanks so much for coming on. People, this is a sneak preview. People are going to see you again in a couple weeks on the podcast, but this is very much needed right now. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, my friend.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.